Hello, welcome back to Jimbo's PC Builds. Recently in my main build video where I've covered the actual build, and I also did a separate video on testing them, which I'll leave links in the description box below, I discovered a problem with the NVMe SSD that I bought. What I'd actually bought was what's called a NAND SSD, which they look very similar to a PCI Express NVMe drive. Now you can only really tell them apart by one of two things. On the PCI Express version of the drive, it's got one notch on the connector end. On the SSD version, it's got two notches on the end. So I've got two separate boxes here. One is for an SSD and one is for a PCIe. You can see there, that's the SSD version. You can see in the box there's two notches in the end of the connector. You can clearly see in the PCI Express version there is only one notch in the end. Now, one of the huge things you've got to remember when you're putting an NVMe drive into your motherboard, there are two places it can go. One is towards the top of the motherboard, which is closer to the CPU. The second one is towards the bottom of the motherboard and is further away. The one towards the top, closer to the CPU, which also happens to be the fastest lane for an NVMe drive, is only compatible with PCI Express NVMe drives. It will not take an SSD drive in pretty much all the motherboards I'm aware of. There may be exceptions to that, but if you're going to buy a mainstream ATX motherboard, you're going to hit that. So what you'll end up having to do if you buy an SSD drive, you'll have to put it into the much slower bottom connector. So please be aware that when you're buying a motherboard and buying an NVMe drive, that you buy a PCI Express one if you want to get the most out of the performance of an NVMe drive. Alright, that was a very quick video, but I wanted to cover this subject because for your average person going out and buying an NVMe drive, who may have done it for the first time, or may have used SSDs or hard drives before, they might not be aware of this issue. And the problem you're also going to have is when you're putting a PCI Express NVMe drive into a motherboard, it takes more PCI Express lanes than say an SSD one. So you've got to be aware of that as well when putting it in, because if you want to put a NVMe drive in and you've got lots of SATA drives to connect up to the SATA ports, you may find that you've got problems with it taking the lane, so you won't recognize all the hard drives, etc. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But be aware there are very big differences between the two. Alright, I hope you found that information useful. If you did, please put a like on the video. Please click the bell notification to be aware of future videos. Subscribe, and always, as remember, take care.